Hey everyone, and welcome to a deep dive, into Christopher Marlowe's Dr. Faustus.
Oh, Dr.
You
Faustus.
might be thinking, wait, isn't that like a play about a guy who,
Huh.
sells his soul to the devil?
Right.
What's so deep about that?
Yeah.
But but trust me, this is way more than just like a simple morality tale.
Yeah.
You know, we're gonna uncover some pretty surprising connections
Yeah.
between medieval carnival traditions, uh, anxieties around knowledge and power during the Reformation, and how all of that explodes onto the stage
Right.
in this incredible play.
Yeah, and what's so fascinating here is that Dr. Faustus isn't just a work of fiction. It's actually based on a real historical figure.
Okay, hold on. So there was an actual Dr. Faustus walking around back in the
Oh,
day.
yeah.
Our sources for this deep dive mention a mix of academic excerpts, historical accounts, and some pretty cool deep dives into morality plays and medieval theater.
Right.
So where do we even start with this guy?
Well, the historical Dr. Faustus, or Johann Faustus as he was known, was a bit of a celebrity in early 16th century Germany.
Really?
He was a magician and astrologer, and his reputation was, well, let's just say it preceded him.
Hmm.
There are actual records of him from the circle around Martin Luther,
Wow.
including mentions by Luther himself.
Luther as in the Reformation Luther.
That's right, the one and only.
Wow. Okay, this is already getting interesting.
Yeah.
What did Luther have to say about this Faustus character?
Well, in his table talk, Luther actually describes Faustus as an assistant to the devil.
Oh, okay.
And Philip Melanchthon, Luther's close friend and a leading humanist scholar, also weighed in.
Okay.
He called Faustus a magician who met a rather violent end, and even went so far as to warn everyone about the dangers of lawless spirits.
So this Faustus guy was already stirring up controversy during his
Oh,
lifetime.
yeah, he was a controversial figure for sure.
And it's interesting that Melanchthon specifically called out lawless spirits.
Right.
Because our sources point out that he was a university official in Wittenberg right in the thick of the Reformation. What was going on there that might have shaped how people saw Faustus?
Well, Wittenberg was a hotbed of intellectual and religious debate,
Right.
but it also had its share of, shall we say, unruly students.
Okay, so we're talking about more than just late-night study sessions here.
Oh,
It
yeah.
sounds like these students were pushing boundaries and maybe even causing a bit of chaos.
A bit. Yeah, they were known for their reveling in irreverence.
Got it.
Melanchthon was actually trying to crack down on some of their activities that were causing public tumults at night.
Interesting.
He saw these students as a threat to order and stability.
So could it be that Faustus, with his reputation for magic and dealings with the devil, became a symbol of these anxieties about knowledge and power?
That's a really insightful connection. It's not hard to see how Faustus, this figure, who supposedly dabbled in forbidden knowledge and made pacts with dark forces, would tap into those fears, especially during a time when the very foundations of religious authority were being questioned.
Okay, so we've got this real-life magician and astrologer who becomes entangled with the anxieties of the Reformation.
Yeah, it's a fascinating intersection of history and legend.
But how does that historical figure morph into the legendary Dr. Faustus that we know from Marlowe's play?
Well, that's where the story gets even more intriguing.
Okay.
One of the earliest written accounts we have comes from Philip Camerarius's opera Horarum Subsicivarum, published in 1561.
Okay.
In this version, Faustus is presented more as a drunken illusionist, blurring the line between serious magic and absurd entertainment.
So even early on, there's this sense of mystery and maybe even a bit of theatrics surrounding Faustus.
Absolutely.
It's like he's already on his way to becoming a legend.
Exactly. And then in 1587, Johann Spies publishes The History of the Damnable Life and Deserved Death of Dr. Ion Faustus.
Okay.
Now, this is where the narrative really starts to take shape.
Hmm.
We get the pact with the devil, the quest for ultimate power, and the inevitable damnation.
Right.
It's essentially the blueprint for Marlowe's play.
Okay, so Spies takes those scattered stories and rumors about Faustus and weaves them into a more complete narrative. But what I find fascinating is that Marlowe doesn't just rehash Spies' version.
yeah.
He takes it and runs with it, transforming it into something much more complex and dramatically powerful.
Absolutely. Marlowe is a master storyteller, and he elevates the Faustus legend by adding his own unique touches.
Like what?
Well, for instance, he introduces the character of Mephistopheles the devil, who serves as Faustus's constant companion and tempter.
Mephistopheles, he's such a complex character, more than just a stereotypical devil. He's almost like Faustus's confidant in a twisted way.
Precisely, and Marlowe also digs deeper into Faustus's motivations.
Yeah.
He emphasizes Faustus's intellectual ambitions, his thirst for knowledge that transcends the earthly realm.
Right.
It's not just about power for power's sake. It's about pushing the boundaries of human understanding.
That makes me think about the whole context of the Renaissance. You know,
Right.
a time of incredible intellectual and artistic flourishing,
Yes.
but also a time of questioning traditional authority and exploring new frontiers of knowledge.
You're right on the mark. Faustus, in many ways, embodies that spirit of the Renaissance. He's driven by a desire to break free from the limitations of his time, to grasp knowledge that was previously considered forbidden.
Right.
It's this ambition that makes him both a compelling and a tragic figure.
So we're seeing how Marlowe takes this existing Faustus material and injects it with the intellectual and cultural currents of his own time.
Exactly. He's weaving together history, legend, and the spirit of the Renaissance.
But our sources also mention these medieval carnival traditions.
Right.
And I have to admit, I'm not quite seeing the connection to Dr. Faustus.
Okay.
Help me out here. What were these carnivals all about?
Well, imagine a world turned upside down. Medieval carnivals were these incredible spectacles where social norms were flipped and people indulged in excess and revelry. They were full of elaborate costumes, music, dancing, feasting.
That's fun.
Oh, it was, but they also had a darker side.
The darker side. What do you mean?
Well, these carnival processions often featured depictions of hell and devils with elaborate masks and costumes.
Really?
They were meant to be both entertaining and a little bit frightening, a way to confront the darker aspects of human nature. There were even traditions of burning effigies of devils and fools as a symbolic way of purging evil.
Wow, that's intense.
It was quite a spectacle.
Okay, now I'm starting to see the connection to Dr. Faustus.
Yeah,
His story is full of feasting, temptation, and ultimately a pretty fiery ending.
right.
It's like Marlowe is tapping into that same carnival-esque energy.
Exactly. Think about the episode of Faustus's gluttonous feasting described in the history.
Okay.
It's a scene straight out of a medieval carnival where indulgence and excess reigns supreme.
Wow.
And that same spirit of pushing boundaries and exploring the darker side of human experience runs throughout Marlowe's play.
It's almost like the play itself becomes a kind of carnival,
I like that.
where we, the audience, are invited to confront our own desires and fears alongside Faustus.
That's a brilliant insight. Marlowe is using these familiar elements of popular entertainment, these carnival traditions, to explore some very profound questions about morality, temptation, and the consequences of our choices.
Okay, so we've got the historical Faustus, the evolution of his legend, the influence of Renaissance thought, and even these echoes of medieval carnivals.
It's all there.
But Dr. Faustus is also deeply rooted in the tradition of morality plays, right?
Absolutely.
Could you explain how that theatrical form shapes Marlowe's work?
Absolutely. Morality plays were incredibly popular in medieval and early Renaissance Europe.
Yeah.
They used allegorical figures to teach moral lessons, often exploring themes of sin redemption and the battle between good and evil.
So it's like a theatrical version of those cautionary tales we all heard as kids, right?
In a way, yes, but what makes morality plays so interesting is that they don't shy away from the complexities of human nature.
Okay.
They explore the temptations that we all face, the struggles we have with our own desires, and the consequences of our choices.
And Dr. Faustus definitely fits into that mold, right?
He does.
He's tempted by the devil, makes a fateful choice,
Right.
and ultimately pays the price.
Yeah.
But what makes Marlowe's play so captivating is that it goes beyond a simple good versus evil framework, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. Marlowe digs deeper. He probes the psychological and emotional depths of his characters. He makes us question, makes us think, makes us confront the darkness within ourselves. And he does it all within this established framework of the morality play, but he elevates it, stretches it, and transforms it into something truly extraordinary.
Yeah. You know, one of the things that makes Dr. Faustus so compelling is the way Marlowe plays with our expectations. He takes this familiar story, you know, this morality play structure, and then he twists it, subverts it, and turns it into something entirely new.
Now that you mention it, there are some pretty wild shifts in how the story unfolds compared to, say, Spies' version.
Yeah.
What stands out to you as the most significant change Marlowe makes?
Well, for starters, think about how Marlowe handles the moment Faustus signs the devil's bond.
In the history, that pivotal moment happens much later in the story, but Marlowe brings it right to the forefront,
Right.
making it one of the first things we see on stage.
Yeah, and it's not just that he moves it earlier in the play, right?
Right.
It's the way he portrays Faustus's reaction immediately after signing.
Exactly.
Like, if I remember correctly, Faustus is already having second thoughts, like he's questioning the bargain he's just made.
Exactly. Marlowe throws us right into the heart of Faustus's internal conflict.
Right.
We see him wrestling with doubt and fear, even as he's trying to convince himself that he's made the right choice.
It's like watching a train wreck in slow motion. You know,
Yeah.
you know it's coming, but you can't look away.
Exactly. A really powerful image.
Yeah. And it really captures the intensity of that scene. We, the audience, are right there with Faustus as he grapples with the consequences of his actions. Speaking of consequences, one thing that struck me was how Marlowe condenses a lot of the action in the play,
Right.
particularly in Act 2's scene.
Ah, yes. The telescoping of events, as some scholars call it.
Right.
Marlowe takes what could have been a series of spread-out episodes and crams them into a single, incredibly powerful scene.
Can you give me a specific example of how that works?
Sure.
I mean, what's the effect of condensing the story like that?
Well, for instance, think about all the different places Faustus travels to and all the feats he performs after he makes his pact with the devil.
Right.
In the history, these events are spread out over time, but Marlowe compresses them into a rapid-fire montage, giving us a whirlwind tour of Faustus's experiences.
So instead of seeing each of those events play out in detail,
Right.
we get a kind of highlights reel of Faustus's rise and fall.
Exactly.
It's like a fast forward through his 24 years of power.
Precisely, and that creates a sense of both excitement and unease. On the one hand, we see Faustus at the height of his powers, experiencing all these wonders and indulging in all sorts of pleasures.
Right.
But on the other hand, there's this underlying sense of dread, this feeling that it's all happening too fast, that it can't possibly last.
It's like that feeling you get when you're on a roller coaster.
Yeah.
That exhilarating rush as you climb to the top, but then that knot in your stomach
Right.
as the thronk is coming.
Exactly.
And Marlowe is a master at playing with that tension, keeping us on the edge of our seats. He also throws in some unexpected twists and turns, right?
It does.
Like those scenes with the clowns.
Ah, the clowns. They're such a fascinating element of the play.
I was going to say, they seem a bit out of place at first glance.
Right.
I mean, here we have this intense story about a man selling his soul to the devil, and then suddenly we've got these clowns cracking jokes and causing mischief.
Right.
It's almost jarring.
Exactly. And that's precisely what Marlowe is doing. He's deliberately juxtaposing these comic scenes with the more tragic and philosophical elements of the play. It's a way of reminding us that even in the face of damnation, there's still this element of human folly and absurdity.
It's like he's saying, hey, even when we're dealing with the weightiest matters of life and death, we're still capable of being ridiculous.
Exactly. It's a kind of dark humor that adds another layer to the play's complexity.
And then there are those allegorical figures, the good angel and the bad angel, constantly whispering in Faustus's ear.
Ah, yes, the embodiment of Faustus's internal struggle. They represent that constant battle between temptation and righteousness that's raging within him.
And they make it so clear that this isn't just some abstract moral debate.
Right.
It's a real visceral struggle that's tearing Faustus apart. I mean, we see him wrestling with his conscience, wanting to repent, but then being lured back in by the promise of power and knowledge.
It's that push and pull that makes Faustus such a compelling character, wouldn't you say?
Yeah.
He's not simply a villain, nor is he a straightforward tragic hero. He's something in between, a man caught between his aspirations and his conscience.
And all of this is playing out against the backdrop of the Reformation.
Right.
A time when people were questioning everything they thought they knew about religion, authority, and the nature of good and evil.
Absolutely. It's impossible to separate Dr. Faustus from that historical context. Faustus's pursuit of forbidden knowledge, his willingness to challenge the boundaries of what's acceptable, it all reflects the intellectual and spiritual ferment of the Renaissance.
It's like he's a symbol of that era.
Yeah.
A man who embodies both the incredible potential and the potential dangers of that unbridled quest for knowledge.
You've hit the nail on the head. Faustus is a product of his time, but his story transcends that time. It speaks to something fundamental about the human condition, this desire to push beyond the limits, to grasp for something more, even if it means risking everything.
And that brings us to the ending of the play.
Right.
Which is, it's pretty intense, to say the least.
Yeah, it is.
I mean, we see Faustus literally dragged off to hell, begging for mercy. It's not exactly a feel-good moment.
No, it's not. It's a harrowing scene, and it leaves a powerful impression on the audience. But even in his final moments, Faustus remains a complex and enigmatic figure.
I'm glad you brought that up,
Uh-huh.
because I was thinking about that very thing.
Okay.
We're left wondering, is he truly repentant?
Hmm.
Or is he just terrified of what awaits him in hell?
That's the brilliance of Marlowe's writing. He doesn't give us easy answers. He leaves us to grapple with the ambiguity, to ponder the complexities of Faustus's choices and the nature of his ultimate fate.
Speaking of grappling with complex ideas,
Okay.
there's one concept that we haven't touched on yet,
All right.
and it's pretty crucial to understanding the theological context of the play Purgatory.
Yes, purgatory. It's this fascinating concept that played a significant role in medieval Catholic theology,
Right.
but started to lose its grip during the Reformation. Essentially, it's this intermediate state after death where souls could be purged of their sins before entering heaven.
So it's like a second chance, a way to make amends for your earthly transgressions.
That's a great way to put it.
I always thought of it as a kind of waiting room in the afterlife.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. But here's where things get interesting.
Okay.
During the Reformation, Protestant reformers began to challenge the idea of purgatory.
Hmm.
They emphasized a more decisive outcome, either heaven or hell, based primarily on faith and God's grace.
So no more second chances?
Well, not exactly. The concept of repentance and forgiveness remains central to Protestant theology.
Okay.
But the idea of purgatory as a specific place where souls could atone for their sins fell out of favor.
Okay, so how does that theological shift impact Dr. Faustus?
Right.
I mean, the play was written during this time of religious upheaval, so I'm guessing it's not just a coincidence.
You're right. It's not a coincidence at all. This shift in thinking about the afterlife had a profound impact on the development of the tragic pattern in morality plays.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What exactly do you mean by the tragic pattern?
Sure.
And how does it connect to the idea of purgatory fading from the picture?
Well, think about those earlier morality plays. They often offered the possibility of redemption, even for characters who had committed grave sins. But in later morality plays, particularly those written during the Tudor era, there's a move toward more definitive outcomes. Characters either achieve salvation or face eternal damnation, with less emphasis on the possibility of atonement after death.
So the stakes are higher, the consequences are more absolute.
Exactly.
There's no more safety net of purgatory to soften the blow.
Exactly. And this connects directly to Faustus. He's given multiple opportunities to repent, but he ultimately chooses to remain bound to his pact with the devil. And because the concept of purgatory is largely absent from the play's theological framework, his fate is sealed. There's no possibility of a second chance, no way to atone for his sins after death.
It's a much bleaker outlook, wouldn't you say?
It is.
No room for redemption, just a straight shot to eternal damnation.
It certainly reflects the anxieties and uncertainties of the Reformation era, this sense that the choices we make in this life have eternal consequences and there's no guarantee of a second chance.
And Marlowe captures that perfectly in Dr. Faustus.
He does.
It's not just a play about one man's downfall. It's a reflection of a society grappling with these profound theological questions.
Absolutely.
Wow, it's amazing how much we've uncovered in this deep dive.
It really is.
I mean, we started with a simple question, who was Dr. Faustus?
Right?
And now we're talking about medieval carnivals, the Reformation, and the complexities of the afterlife.
It's a testament to the enduring power of this play. Dr. Faustus isn't just a story, it's a window into a whole world of ideas, beliefs, and anxieties.
And Marlowe doesn't shy away from the tough questions, does he?
No, he doesn't.
He makes us confront our own desires, our own ambitions, and the potential consequences of our choices.
He really does.
I mean, is Faustus meant to be a purely villainous figure, or is there something more to him?
That's the question that's haunted scholars and audiences for centuries. Is Faustus a tragic hero, a man of great intellect and potential who's ultimately undone by his own flaws? Or is he a cautionary tale, a symbol of human hubris and the dangers of overreaching?
I can see both sides of the argument. I mean, he clearly makes some terrible choices.
He does?
But there's also a part of me that can't help but feel a bit of sympathy for him.
I understand that.
He's so driven by this thirst for knowledge, this desire to push the boundaries of what's possible.
And that's what makes him such a compelling character. He's not a one-dimensional villain. He's a complex human being with both noble aspirations and fatal flaws. And Marlowe, in his brilliance, leaves it up to us, the audience, to decide how we ultimately judge him.
It's that ambiguity, that lack of easy answers that makes Dr. Faustus so thought-provoking doesn't just tell us a story. It invites us into a conversation, a debate about the nature of good and evil, the limits of ambition, and the very meaning of our existence.
One of the things that strikes me about Dr. Faustus is how relevant it still feels today, even after all these centuries.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
We might not be making deals with the devil literally,
Right.
but we're still grappling with many of the same questions that tormented Faustus.
Think about it. We live in a world obsessed with knowledge and power. We have access to more information than ever before, but it's also easy to get lost in that information overload.
It's like we're all constantly tempted to make our own Faustian bargains, to sacrifice something precious for the promise of greater knowledge, greater power, greater control over our lives.
It's a constant temptation.
The internet, social media, all of these technologies offer us incredible opportunities,
Right.
but they also come with risks.
And that's the challenge, isn't it? To harness those opportunities without succumbing to the temptations that can lead to our own downfall, to find that balance between ambition and humility, between the pursuit of knowledge and the preservation of our humanity.
And that brings us back to the final thought I want to leave our listeners with today.
Okay.
As you move through your own life, as you encounter your own temptations and make your own choices, remember the story of Dr. Faustus.
Ask yourself, what are the things you truly value? What are the lines you wouldn't cross, the bargains you wouldn't make, even if it meant sacrificing something you deeply desire?
Dr. Faustus is a powerful reminder that even in our pursuit of knowledge and power, we must never lose sight of our humanity.
And that the choices we make have consequences not just for ourselves, but for those around us.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Dr. Faustus.
It's been a pleasure.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep seeking those deeper meanings beneath the surface of the stories we tell ourselves.